Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, I hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. So, what topic shall we talk about today? Well, folks, today we're going to talk a little bit about our nomadic culture. You might be asking yourself, what are we talking about, our nomadic culture? And it, and I'm really honing in on the United States, but this really can apply to just about anywhere. And some of the ins and outs of our nomadic culture. As we jump into organizational culture and kind of ripple out in our conversations, that's how we'll start out today as well. You know, people will move from place to place, and geographically, it could be different states, different parts of a country, just towns down the road, and so on. But in organizations that are filtered, you know, many thousands of organizations, that could be pushing to nearly a million, right? There's so much opportunity to go to different places to work for different jobs or, for your career progression and all these things. And we can see that through a positive lens, certainly, and we should look at everything as an opportunity versus kind of as a result of, right? As a just a reaction to kind of a thing. But we also can't delude ourselves. We have to look at underneath the layers of things. And as we have discussed about organizations and their effectiveness and their efficiency, their effectiveness, all of these elements, one of the key key performance indicators is retention or turnover, if you want to look at it from that side of the house. Turnover rates. What do we see with turnover rates? Well, what we see is if you start to go, okay, you can do the math even very generally in your head. If you're in a small town or large community or even a city, you could probably Google this pretty quickly and figure out how many organizations there are roughly, right? And you will probably be shocked how many there are. And take a conservative number. We know turnover can be as high as 45% in some organizations. And those who tout less than 10%, if they aren't using gimmicks and they aren't using hiring firms and hiring services and so forth, but you can see a range, right? So pick a number. Let's pick a number in between that. Let's pick it 25%, right? And just call that the mean. Now, figure out how many organizations there are, figure out how many employed people there are with these combined organizations, and take 25% of that number and lop that right off, right? And what you'll find is you'll probably be shocked whether you're in a smaller community or a big city. It doesn't really matter. But what you'll find is that there are a lot of people who are in transit between one organization and another, in transit between an organization and nothing because maybe the business closed down or maybe they just had random layoffs or all those things, right? And so people are trying to scamper to find new work and so on. And this is at every level. This is from the entry level all the way up to the professional levels, right? It could be your leadership in organizations at site levels, for example. And people are looking for work. And some work, depending on how specialized it is, isn't as usual in some areas. So what does that mean? That essentially means that people have to go outside their area to find new work. Now, on the face, you may say, oh, well, Steve, no kidding. Thanks, Captain Obvious. Yes, but it goes deeper than just I've got to move to another city or town or take on a job in another state and so on and so forth. That is true. What you have to look at, though, is the effects of these things. What is the effect of this occurring doing to culture, right? And while this video isn't going to be a 2-hour expose on this, let's just jump into it at least at the kiddie pool level. Let's look at how it impacts families. First of all, if you grew up in a home area, it may mean that you have to move away from that area. Now, this happens, but it doesn't always happen to people everywhere all the time. And so what you can have is a fracturing of families. You have children in schools who've developed their own culture, right? They've grown up with their friends and then in the community and maybe their church and so on and so forth. And now, because of an organization, and sometimes things have to happen for sure, but we can't be frivolous with creating turnover either. And it seems a little too easy to just create turnover than it is to what? Develop my team, develop greater cohesion, develop the organizational culture. Because what it comes back to is the organizational culture isn't just impacting the organization. It's impacting all of culture. And you could have fragmentation, say, uprooting your children from their lives and their friends and their growth in the schools and so forth. I was in the Air Force, so I can absolutely speak to this from moving from assignment to assignment every few years, right? And my kids having to go through that. Now, there is a particular resilience that kids growing up have. Now, my kids had siblings. I had 3 kids, so they had, their core friends group with them all the time, right? Maybe they didn't think they were, but they were, right? But that isn't always true for everyone, right? You may have only children, you may have kids separated by great ages. And so the community and their life that they've grown becomes fragmented, right? Stability now, because stability, while isn't necessarily addressed in regular communities, in the military, in the Air Force specifically, they do regard this. There is a community environment. There is this knowledge and awareness of this nomadic aspect, right? It is part of the broader culture. And because it is, they put mechanisms in place, family support structures and systems and so forth and so on. So there is hey, welcome to our community, welcome to, XYZ, welcome to, and so on. Or, hey, we're doing a, send-off celebration because somebody had orders somewhere else. There is that, it's a part of the community. That whole moving element is part of the experience, right? So it isn't as austere as it is in the civilian community, the rest of society, right? Where these things don't necessarily exist in mass. Now, I'm not saying they don't exist. There are things out there, but then there are also those who are a little more to themselves about their lives, and rightly so. People have the choice to have a small or large friend group, or and so on and so forth. But it could also mean families, right? They may have had family support, and by support I don't mean like actual support, but like loving support and community around them, right? So it's not just children; it's also spouses, significant others, and so on. And even an individual who's moving to a different state or area, also, how are they received? I'm from the West originally, okay? And I went to the South. But in the South, when I speak, you don't hear any Southern accent, right? So they thought I was from the North. Well, they were a little bit predisposed, and I say they, a little generalization, but there were those who were predisposed that if you didn't have a Southern accent, then you must be from the North, and therefore, there was a little bit of a wall there, to put it mildly, in some cases, right? Now, I'm not saying that was true for everyone, okay? There were some very lovely people there as well, but it wasn't the case, right? So And that's a mild thing for me. It's not so mild for others, right? You're talking about different areas where race is an issue, right? Sexism, it could be ageism, right? If you're older and you're coming into a younger community, do you think there's going to be a quick meld? Probably not. And vice versa. If it's a little bit older community and you're young coming in, there may be a little bit of standoffishness, right? There are going to be these isms that people have to deal with, that become pervasive with what? With this nomadic life that we live now in the United States, where people move, and some of these moves, folks, can be ones where you didn't, you moved within the same company, right? There's a nomadic effect to that too, and now there can be a positive side of this, right? You're exposing yourself to great different cultures and experiences and perspectives, absolutely, right? And so you do have to see that there's a glass with water half, it's half full, right? But it's also half empty, right? We can't delude ourselves into thinking that the glass is always full, right? And definitely in organizations, if they treat their retention and turnover rate, if they're just cavalier and it's like, oh, whatever, and they just become this mill of bringing people in and recycling them out every year or two, three, or four, then what do you think? Well, first of all, it degrades any trust within that organization, but it also sends a signal. Now, back to the organization. The organization is marketing themselves positively and negatively, right? Depending on which aspect of this we're talking about, into culture. So you have all of these folks who are part of your organization that may had an overall negative experience, now are part of your unpaid negative marketing campaign. Okay. Now there's also the flip side, right? But we all know that bad news can travel around the world 3 times before good news is even laced up its shoes, right? So that's another aspect. This affects organizations. You may think, well, that's just life and people have to deal with it. Well, that is just life, but guess what? Your product and service is also going to be impacted. It absolutely is being impacted. You may not understand why, if you're an organizational owner or leader, why business has kind of dropped, or why this has kind of occurred, or why that has kind of occurred. Well, reel it back a year, 2, 3, 5. How many people have you negatively influenced by the mode and method in which you led an organization or ran your organization, if you're the owner and so forth? And if you were part of an organization, right? How many folks have you negatively influenced? And are we aware that all this is going on? So you have that side of the house occurring too with retention and so forth. You have that going on and being a direct result of, okay? Now, that nomadic culture, well, it can fracture families and simultaneously give them exposure to, say, different cultures, which can be good and also can be bad, right? They can be negative cultural influences or negative. If somebody is racist or a particular community is very racist, and I'm saying generally speaking, right? It's not like the whole community is racist, but let's just say there are elements of that. And somebody goes to work in that community that is of a race that is not accepted or an age, right? Then these things can infringe on this person's pursuit of happiness, right? Your pursuit of happiness that we speak about so often in our Constitution, right? So we have to be cognizant, right? We have to be highly aware that organizational cultures directly influence and impact, right? Mostly negatively, okay? Mostly negatively, because it's not just social cost, but it's also financial cost, right? of the individuals that they would move around out versus developing them, versus investing in them, versus doubling down on strengthening the organizational culture. And refusing to do that results in the other. And the other drives up inflation, drives up costs to families and people in the community, drives everything up, has driven up home prices, has driven up rent, has driven everything up. All the cost is going up. Why? Because it's a marketing opportunity now for other industries to make money off of this. You would have to be completely deluded not to see that there are those who have seen this, right, over time, that have sat back and say, well, how can we make money off this? Oh, well, we'll do this and we'll do that, right? So people coming into our community are getting hit with all these costs. Oh, well, there's a fee for this and there's a fee for that, right? Even local governments are making money in other forms of taxation, essentially, with fees and hidden costs and all the things, right? And all the handling and all the initial sign up, and you get internet, you get this, you get your electric, you do all the things, and you're getting hit with all the fees and all the excesses. Even they may feel very light and seem like nothing, but when you multiply this out, it is a massive fleecing. This nomadic culture that we've had to buy into, and I say had to because it isn't like people are always choosing to move. If you're choosing to move somewhere, hey, I want to move to there. That's different. That's a whole different animal, right? You've planned, prepared, you're embarking. If you're, let's say, a welder in a smaller community, and there aren't tons of welding positions out there, right? You will have to move to a different community now. And now you have to deal with the social aspects. Now you have to deal with the financial costs. And somebody is making that money off of you, okay? It may be that you take a hit in salary. It may be that you get a bump in salary. But you're always going to be paying for these moves. And it isn't the organization that's paying the cost, folks. It's the individuals paying the cost. Let's be frank, or let's be to the bone on this. It is the human beings who are paying the cost, paying the freight of organizational inefficiency. Okay? Organizational ineffectiveness or poor organizational culture is absolutely affecting what it requires for families and people in communities to live and thrive. The difference could be that you were thriving in one place and barely surviving in another, right? Because the cost of living is too high, because of taxes and housing and all the rest, right? All the costs have gone up. So you were thriving in one location and now you're barely surviving in another. Or you were barely surviving here, you got a little bit of an improvement in your finances there, but the social costs, right? So and look, folks, yes, there are trade-offs oftentimes that we will come across, and those trade-offs do make us more resilient humans, no doubt. This is part of the lesson of life, right? But we don't need to be taken advantage of by poor organizations that are poorly addressing their own organizational culture and then exciting and thrusting people into nomadic situations that aren't even necessary to begin with, right? If moves were out of choice, you would still see moves, right? But they would be healthy moves. They wouldn't be ones that were fractured, right? Now, there's always going to be a learning curve, right? With moves, there always is. But understand, folks, we're creating and fueling a greater nomadic culture that is infringing on people's ability to thrive in life because we don't focus on improving our organizational culture. And quite literally, in parallel, it also means we have to improve our communities, our culture, community wide, and so on outward, right? So, just a message for today to understand a little bit about this nomadic culture we live in and how being an ineffective organization that has poor organizational culture fuels and pushes that even more intensely. All right, folks, that's all for today. Remember, hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. When you do that, what you'll find is not only are we helping to transform culture, but we're transforming our own lives. And that's important because we want to be thriving, producing, serving, and healthy humans in the cultures that we live in. All right, folks, have a fantastic day. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.